Let me tell you how bad it's gotten. 10 days into a 2-week fishing trip and 900 miles from home, I called my wife, who was 8 months pregnant with our first child. Now, any sane person would object to that statement alone, but hey, I'm just getting started. I was sitting in my car watching dusk fall across the Bulkley River, excited to tell her about my day. When she answered, her voice sounded shaky and strained. "Someone broke into our house today," she said. And my first thought was, I swear, good thing I have all my spay rods with me here. I'm not kidding. Of course, I was relieved she was okay, and I asked all the rational questions and said comforting things, but that's not really the point, is it? And sure, I cut the trip short, packed up all my gear that night, hooked up the boat, and headed home in the morning. But then again, the fishing was lousy anyway. Which, if we're asking real questions of ourselves here, was something else to consider on the 17-hour drive home. In 1978, as we cast tiny flies from a rowboat on a small pond, Andy Landforce, the great Oregon steelhead guide, said to me, "Bluegills are the fish of the future." I was 12 years old at the time and already deep in the grips of steelhead mania. Steelhead are big, powerful, migratory rainbow trout that travel to the ocean and return to spawn in beautiful, fast-flowing rivers. They are among the most prized sport fish in the world. Bluegills, in contrast, inhabit murky, warm-water ponds, don't fight much, and average about 5 inches in length. Needless to say, I had no concept of why we were wasting time on a farm pond when there were steelhead to be caught in nearby rivers. I remember thinking he must be joking because if bluegills were the fish of the future, it was a pretty bleak future indeed. When I think back to that summer afternoon and the statement that has somehow stuck with me, I wonder, was Andy anticipating the sad state of steelhead populations we find ourselves with today, or did he mean it on a more personal level? It's difficult to trace the exact beginning of an obsession. Can a single snowflake falling on a quiet slope trigger an avalanche? But it must have been quite early for me. I can vividly recall an event that occurred when I was still very small. My father, who following my parents' divorce lived in another state, came to visit and took me trout fishing. It was early spring and the weather was rotten. Knowing him better now, I'm sure there must have been 1,000 things Dad would have rather done than stand out in the rain, but I'd been looking forward to the fishing trip for weeks. And so we went. It rained all day, and yet we fished, me too happy to notice my soaking clothes and my dad patiently casting for hour after wet hour. Late in the afternoon, with any realistic hope of catching fish long gone, my dad suddenly hooked something that ran downstream with unbelievable fury. His little trout rod bent into the handle and the drag made a shrieking sound that pierced the noise of the rapids below. We fought that fish for more than an hour, through emotional highs and lows, down through the tail out and into the churning whitewater below. At one point, the line snagged on a boulder, and Dad handed me the rod and waded out chest deep to free it. As the line came tight, I could feel the incredible strength of the fish pulling me downstream, and a hot surge of adrenaline shot through my body. When we finally landed that fish, a bright 14-pound winter steelhead, my dad lifted me up in the air in celebration. It was the first steelhead I ever felt on the line. The die was cast. Who knew what that fish would mean to my future? Throughout my childhood and early teen years, I was consumed by steelhead fishing. Literally. I ate, drank, read, thought, and dreamed steelhead. My single mother, conscious of her son's strange obsession, took me fishing every Sunday, rain or shine. Not that she would actually fish with me. As a graduate student with a full-time job, she was far too busy to fish. She spent those Sundays in the car, at one riverside turnout or another, with textbooks and notepads spread on the dashboard, studying. My little brother would be wrapped in blankets with his stuffed animals and comic books in the back seat, waiting while I fished. I think the experience scarred him permanently. To this day, he has not the slightest inclination to do anything even remotely outdoorsy. Years later, when I returned to that rainy western Oregon river, several people stopped me and asked, "Weren't you the kid whose mom waited for you in the car?" And that's how it was. I fished, and my mom and brother waited through a year of Sundays before I caught my first steelhead, and hundreds more after that. But the madness was firmly in place. And thus began a pattern that would repeat itself over and over again, my single-minded pursuit coupled with someone else's sacrifice. It's been said that as you grow older, your thought process becomes less focused on the self, that you gain empathy, compassion, and a sense of responsibility to others. Collectively, these traits are frequently referred to as growing up, unless you're a steelhead bum, in which case growing older merely means a widening circle of possibilities. Longer trips to faraway places, often involving the kind of equipment reserved for military conquests of small developing countries. Airplanes, helicopters, four-wheelers, jet sleds, rafts, drift boats, all in service of one purpose: getting the steelhead bum to the steelhead. And we're not just talking about the home river anymore either. The Oregon high desert, northern British Columbia, Idaho, southeast Alaska, and even Russia come into play. After years of such lunacy, the rivers, the fish, and the people all begin to blur into one long, rain-soaked voyage. Not long ago, up on the Skeena, we were driving along the river searching for good water. By some miracle, my cell phone had service, and on a whim I called my buddy Ivan, who, even more miraculously, was between adventures and actually at work, for advice. He's fished this river for years, and from his office in Ventura, California, he gave directions by memory to a spot that was probably loaded with fish. He described a boulder-filled run above a huge set of rapids, and before he hung up, he casually added that it required a short walk down a little hill. I guess I should have paid more attention to that last part. When one of the world's great climbers talks about a short walk down a little hill, well, you ought to take notice. But no, the usual insanity took over, and all I heard was loaded with fish.